Okay, so this time you've really sent us some heavy stuff.
Yeah.
Really heavy stuff. Reading through this material, it feels like I don't know, like we're looking at a potential tipping point. For the global community, it seems like some pretty powerful figures are pushing agendas that could have some pretty serious negative consequences worldwide, if they're left unchecked.
Yeah, it's important to remember that we're kind of analyzing these scenarios as possibilities, not certainties.
Right.
But I think understanding the potential downsides is crucial. It helps us, recognize the warning signs and hopefully safeguard against those worst case scenarios.
Right. Forewarned is forearmed, as they say.
Exactly.
And the issues that you flagged are pretty far-reaching. I mean, we're talking about everything from the stability of governments to the very fabric of our societies,
Yeah.
even down to how technology could be used to, control rather than empower us.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a common thread running through a lot of these sources, and it's this potential for a shift away from global cooperation and democratic norms.
Right.
And we're seeing signs of a world where a few powerful individuals or groups could exert a disproportionate amount of influence,
Yeah.
often at the expense of the many.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. One of the most alarming things that I noticed was this idea of expertise and experience being devalued. It's like these sources are pointing to a world where loyalty helps competence, especially when it comes to leadership roles.
Yeah. What's fascinating here is that it's not just about individual leaders. The sources suggest a kind of systemic shift where long-standing institutions, the ones that are designed to ensure checks and balances, they're being deliberately weakened or even dismantled in some cases.
So instead of having experts in government positions making decisions based on, their knowledge and their experience, we could end up with people whose primary qualification is allegiance to a particular ideology or even a particular individual.
That's the concern, and the global implications are huge. Imagine a world where scientific consensus on issues like climate change is ignored because it doesn't fit a particular political agenda.
Right.
Or where, vital international agreements are just scrapped because they're seen as infringing on national sovereignty, even if that ultimately hurts everyone in the long run.
So it's not just about who's in charge, it's about a fundamental shift in how decisions are made and what values are prioritized.
Precisely. And your sources highlight a number of potential consequences for the global community.
Okay.
We could see a rise in international tensions and conflict as cooperation breaks down.
Yeah.
Economic instability is another concern as protectionist policies become more common, leading to trade wars and disrupted supply chains. Essentially, it's a move away from a rules-based international order towards a system where might makes right.
And if these trends continue, what kind of impact could we see on individual lives? Not just on this global scale, but how would this trickle down to individuals?
The sources suggest a world where individual rights and freedoms are increasingly under threat.
Okay.
We could see more restrictions on freedom of speech and assembly, a crackdown on dissent, and even persecution of minority groups. Essentially, it's a future where the rights of the individual are subservient to the interests of the state or those in power.
That's a pretty bleak picture. And it seems like this disregard for individual rights goes hand in hand with a growing distrust of democratic institutions.
That's right. The sources suggest a deliberate effort to undermine public faith in democracy, portraying it as inefficient, corrupt, or even a threat to national security. And this erosion of trust paves the way for more authoritarian forms of government to take hold, which could have a ripple effect across the globe.
It's like a domino effect. One country becomes more authoritarian, and then its neighbors start to follow suit, either out of fear or a belief that this is the new normal.
Exactly. And the shift towards authoritarianism wouldn't just impact political systems. It could also have a profound effect on social and cultural norms, leading to greater intolerance, determination, and a suppression of diverse viewpoints.
Okay, so we've talked about this potential power shift and the erosion of democratic norms, but there's another piece of the puzzle here that's equally concerning, and that is technology. The sources seem to suggest that instead of being a force for good, technology could actually exacerbate these negative trends.
That's a key insight. We often think of technology as a tool for progress and empowerment. But these sources highlight how certain technologies, especially those related to surveillance, artificial intelligence, and even social media, could be used to concentrate power, control information, and manipulate populations.
So instead of having this more connected, informed world, we could end up in a more fragmented and controlled one.
That's the concern. Imagine a world where facial recognition technology is used for mass surveillance,
Right.
where algorithms determine who gets access to certain resources or opportunities,
Yeah.
where online platforms are used to spread propaganda and disinformation on a massive scale.
And this isn't just some sci-fi dystopia, is it? This stuff is happening right now. We're already seeing how algorithms can be used to manipulate elections, how social media platforms can be weaponized to incite violence and cell division.
That's right. And the sources suggest that these trends are likely to intensify as these technologies become more sophisticated and pervasive. This raises some serious questions about the future of individual privacy, freedom of expression, and even the very nature of truth and reality.
It's like we're handing over the keys to our lives to these powerful technologies without fully understanding the potential consequences. And the people who control these technologies, who hold those keys, may not have our best interests at heart.
That's the crucial point. These sources are urging us to think critically about who controls these powerful technologies and how they're being used. Because if these trends continue unchecked, we could be heading towards a world where technology is a tool of oppression rather than liberation. I think it's easy to get caught up in these, doom and gloom scenarios. But it's important to remember that we're not powerless in the face of these challenges. These sources aren't just highlighting potential problems, they're also pointing toward ways to mitigate the risks and push back against these negative trends.
Okay, good. That makes me feel a little bit better because I was starting to feel like we were just spiraling down this black hole of pessimism.
Yeah.
So if these sources are sounding the alarm, what kind of solutions or countermeasures are they suggesting?
Well, a recurring theme is the need for greater global cooperation.
Okay.
The sources argue that tackling these global challenges requires a collective effort, not just individual nations going it alone.
But we were just talking about how international institutions are being weakened. How can we expect more global cooperation when it seems like everyone's just looking out for their own interests?
That's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
The sources acknowledge that it won't be easy, but they emphasize the importance of strengthening existing multilateral organizations and building new alliances based on shared values.
So instead of retreating into nationalism and isolationism, we need to double down on diplomacy and finding common ground with other nations, even those we might disagree with on certain issues.
Exactly. The sources argue that we need to rediscover the value of multilateralism, recognizing that global problems require global solutions. And this isn't just about governments working together. It also involves fostering cooperation between civil society organizations, academics, businesses, and individuals across borders.
It sounds like it's going to take a massive, coordinated effort to shift course. But where do we even begin?
Well, the sources suggest focusing on a few key areas. One is strengthening democratic institutions and processes.
Okay.
This means protecting voting rights, ensuring a free and independent press, and promoting transparency and accountability in government.
But what about those who are actively trying to undermine democracy? How do we address that threat?
That's where things get tricky. The sources suggest a multi-pronged approach. One aspect is education. We need to equip citizens with the critical thinking skills necessary to recognize propaganda and disinformation.
So media literacy becomes even more important in this kind of world, right? People need to be able to, distinguish between reliable sources of information and those that are pushing a particular agenda.
Absolutely. And it's not just about spotting fake news. It's about understanding how information is produced, how it's framed, and who benefits from its dissemination. It's about empowering people to become critical consumers of information, not just passive recipients.
Okay, so education is key. But are there other ways to counter those who are actively trying to undermine democracy?
Another suggestion is to hold those in power accountable for their actions.
Okay.
This means supporting investigative journalism, advocating for stronger anti-corruption measures, and demanding transparency from government officials.
So it's about shining the light on wrongdoing and making it harder for those in power to act with impunity.
Precisely. The sources argue that sunlight is the best disinfectant. By exposing corruption and abuse of power, we can create a climate where such behavior is less likely to occur.
That makes sense. But what about the technological side of things? We talked earlier about how technology could be used to manipulate and control people. How do we address those risks?
Well, the sources suggest that we need to be more proactive in shaping how these technologies are developed and deployed.
Okay.
One idea is to push for greater transparency from tech companies. We need to understand how their algorithms work, how they're collecting and using our data, and what steps they're taking to prevent misuse of their platforms.
So instead of just blindly accepting whatever new tech gadget or app comes along, we need to be asking tough questions about its impact on our privacy, our security, and our society as a whole.
Exactly. We need to become more discerning consumers of technology, demanding products and services that align with our values. And this requires not just individual action, but also collective action. We need to push for regulations that protect our digital rights, promote ethical development of AI, and prevent the misuse of these powerful technologies.
It sounds like we need a whole new set of digital literacy skills, not just for individuals, but for policymakers, educators, and even the tech companies themselves.
That's a good point. The sources argue that we need a fundamental shift in how we think about technology. It's not enough to simply focus on innovation and efficiency. We also need to prioritize ethics, social impact, and the long-term well-being of humanity.
Okay, so we've talked about strengthening democracy, promoting global cooperation, and shaping technological development, but these are all pretty big systemic changes. What about on a more individual level? What can ordinary people do to make a difference?
Well, the sources emphasize that individual actions, while seemingly small, can collectively have a significant impact.
Like the butterfly effect. One small action can create ripples that spread far and wide.
Exactly. The sources suggest a number of things that individuals can do. One is to simply stay informed and engage in critical thinking. Don't just accept everything you read or hear at face value.
Right.
Question your assumptions, seek out diverse perspectives, and be willing to change your mind when presented with new information.
So it's about becoming more active and engaged citizens, not just passive consumers of information.
That's a big part of it. And it's not just about staying informed, it's also about speaking out against injustice, supporting organizations that are working to make a positive difference, and holding our elected officials accountable for their actions.
It sounds like it's about taking ownership of our democracy, not just assuming that someone else will take care of it.
That's a key point. The sources argue that democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires active participation from all of us.
Okay, so we can all play a role in shaping the future, even if it's just in small ways. But it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of these challenges. How do we stay motivated and avoid falling into despair?
The sources emphasize the importance of finding hope and inspiration in the actions of others. There are countless individuals and organizations around the world who are working tirelessly to make a positive difference.
So it's about connecting with those who are already making a difference and drawing strength from their commitment and passion.
That's one way to stay motivated. And it's also about focusing on the things we can control. We might not be able to single-handedly solve climate change or prevent all forms of injustice, but we can make choices in our daily lives that align with our values.
Like supporting sustainable businesses, reducing our carbon footprint, or advocating for social justice in our communities.
Exactly. Every action we take, no matter how small, contributes to creating the kind of world we want to live in. And by working together, by supporting each other, and by never giving up hope, we can build a future that is more just, more sustainable, and more humane for everyone.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about these big kind of systemic challenges and the need for both individual and collective action.
Yeah.
But I think it'd be helpful to get a little bit more concrete. What are some specific examples of organizations or initiatives that are out there right now pushing back against these negative trends and trying to build a better future?
I think that's a great point. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the enormity of these challenges.
Right.
But I think seeing those real-world examples of people making a difference can be incredibly inspiring and empowering.
For sure. It's like, okay, yeah, these problems are huge,
Mm-hmm.
but there are people out there actually doing something about it.
Yeah.
And that gives me, a bit of hope. So what are some groups that are really standing out in terms of their work?
Well, on the global cooperation front, there are organizations like the United Nations and its various agencies. They're working on everything from climate change to poverty to peacekeeping,
Yeah.
trying to find common ground and solutions that benefit all of humanity.
Yeah, the UN sometimes gets a bad rap for being, bureaucratic and slow-moving,
Right.
but they're still the primary forum for international diplomacy, right? And they've had some significant successes over the years.
Absolutely. They might not always get it right, but they are essential for facilitating dialogue, setting global standards, and coordinating responses to crises. And there are other international organizations doing important work as well.
Sure.
The World Health Organization, for example, played a crucial role in coordinating the global response to the pandemic.
That's true. And there are also a lot of smaller grassroots organizations working on specific issues in their communities. It's like global action is important, but it also needs to be grounded in local realities.
Exactly. And these smaller organizations often have a deeper understanding of the specific challenges facing their communities, and they can be more nimble and responsive in addressing those needs.
Okay, so we've got these global organizations like the UN, and then we've got these smaller grassroots groups. What about organizations that are focused specifically on strengthening democracy and protecting human rights.
There are a lot of great organizations doing vital work in that area. Groups like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch are constantly monitoring human rights abuses around the world and advocating for those whose rights are being violated.
They're like the watchdogs of the global human rights system, right?
Uh-huh.
Calling out governments and corporations that are behaving badly and holding them accountable for their actions.
That's a good way to put it. And they often work in very challenging and dangerous environments, putting themselves at risk to defend the rights of others.
And then there are groups like the ACLU and the Southern Poverty Law Center here in the United States
Right.
that are focused on protecting civil liberties and fighting discrimination.
Those organizations are crucial for defending the rights of marginalized communities and ensuring that everyone has equal access to justice.
Okay, so we've talked about global cooperation, democracy, and human rights. What about technology? Are there organizations specifically focused on ensuring that technology is used for good, not for harm?
There are, and this is a growing field as the impact of technology on our lives becomes more and more profound. Groups like the Electronic Frontier Foundation and Access Now are fighting to protect our digital rights,
Okay.
advocating for privacy, freedom of expression, and net neutrality.
Those are important issues, especially as we become more and more reliant on the internet for everything from, communication to commerce to accessing information. We need to make sure that the digital world is a space where everyone can thrive, not just those who control the technology.
Exactly. And then there are groups like the Future of Life Institute and the Center for Humane Technology that are focused on the ethical implications of artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies. They're trying to ensure that these technologies are developed and deployed in a way that benefits humanity, not just a select few.
So instead of just letting the tech industry kind of dictate the terms, these groups are pushing for a more thoughtful and responsible approach to technological development.
That's right. They're raising awareness about the potential risks, advocating for regulations that protect the public interest, and promoting research into the ethical implications of these technologies.
It sounds like there's a whole ecosystem of organizations out there working on different aspects of these challenges. And it's not just about the big, well-known groups.
Right.
There are also countless smaller organizations working at the local and regional levels.
And it's important to remember that these organizations can't do it alone. They need our support.
Right.
Whether it's through volunteering our time, donating money, spreading awareness, or simply staying informed and engaged, we can all play a role in supporting their work.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's easy to feel like our individual actions don't really make a difference. But when we combine our efforts, when we support each other and work together, we can create a powerful force for change.
And ultimately, that's what it's all about. It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected, that our actions have consequences, and that we have a responsibility to leave the world a better place than we found it.
It's not about being perfect or having all the answers.
Right.
It's about taking that first step, making that commitment to do what we can, and then inspiring others to do the same.
And never underestimating the power of hope. Even in the face of these, daunting challenges, it's essential to believe that a better future is possible.
Yeah.
To hold on to that vision and work towards it with everything we've got.
That's a great note to end on. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us, for sharing your expertise, and for reminding us that even in the face of uncertainty, we can choose to act, to connect, and to build a future that is worthy of our hopes and dreams.